Okay. So my guest today, this is John Earl, and this is SoCal Water Wars. This is my podcast, Fire and Rain. And my guest today is Conner Everts. He's been a frequent guest on here, and you'll see that he's very experienced in water world on many fronts. And so we're going to talk today about the possible resurgence of the concept, at least, of big desal. And so. Um, some years ago, 2022, and I'm going to try to share something with you all here. Back in 2022, Connor and I were at the May 12th, 2022 meeting of the California Coastal Commission, at which time a final vote was taking place. Actually, there were two votes on two parts of the project that had to be approved or disapproved. And finally, after 20 years, after a 20-year battle, which Connors and I were there from the very beginning, starting in Huntington Beach, California, in Orange County, until the very end on this day. And at this meeting, Coastal Commission, going against the will of Governor Gavin Newsom, voted the members of the commission, all 11 who were present, voted unanimously to turn this project down. And here I'm going to show you just the reaction. You won't be able to see or hear the audio because this app doesn't have that. Subsec hasn't arranged that yet. They're working on it. But here you'll be able to see. Well, there you go. You can hopefully see them. You can see some movement on there. They're a little bit choppy. But there's a lot of clapping and yelling and screaming and so forth. And so I'm going to go down here and just read a little bit about why the let's see if I can get a quote here. So the executive director of the Coastal Commission gave a little summary of why he was recommending, why the staff, the scientists at the Coastal Commission were recommending the squelching of this project, this proposed $1.4 billion ocean desalination plant for Huntington Beach, getting it out of the way forever. And he said, first of all, I think we all agree and recognize that the ongoing historic drought is a crisis in California and that desalination facilities will be part of California's future water portfolio. Unfortunately, the desalination project before you today is the wrong project in the wrong place at the wrong time. He predicted that sea level rise would surround the site later on, and the area would be flooded by increased or more intense storms, inundated eventually by that sea level rise, which Poseidon had to account. There was a lack of a coherent and adequate mitigation program for the project's severe effects on local and marine life. The measure to build the plant will likely result in impacts upon the surrounding area that haven't been analyzed. There were environmental justice issues. The cost to upgrade the plant will be substantial and will be passed on to ratepayers, many of whom referred to today are low income and cannot afford such exorbitant water rates, unquote. Ocean desalination sites in the state, he said, should be prioritized based on the critical need of the new water supplies for a particular area. In addition, all other less environmentally damaging and less expensive water supply alternatives should be explored first. And then he said, feasible and appropriate mitigation must be required consistent with the law. In my view, this project fails to meet that standard and is a bridge too far. So I won't bring up the other article I had at the time shortly thereafter, but it was basically of the project proponent for Poseidon, Scott Maloney, who was the point man for the project, gathering all the support he could for it over the much of the past 20 years, since about 2010 or 12 when he started, admitting that big desal projects, profit-inducing projects, desal projects, were a thing of the past in California, and the smaller ones which are, in his view, much less profitable, like the Doheny project in Orange County would be the wave of the future, of whatever future there was for desal. So now I'm going to in just a second here go to one more website here to show you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Conner to get his response here. So let's go back to your screen sharing again, and so here, now here we have, this is an article by USA Today, in which a group of investors, uh, uh, people who want to attract investors, got together and made a proposal here. And the headline is "Crazy," or you can say "Crazy or Genius: Nuclear-Powered Solution to the West Water Crisis." Basically, they want to build up to 7 very large desal plants off the coast of certain federally controlled areas in California and in Mexico's Sea of Cortez, or maybe it's called Sea of Trump now. I'm not sure. And I'm just going to go over very quickly. And this is beyond anything that seemed to be imaginable. But I'm just going to read some of their bullet points here, and then we'll get Conner's reaction to this, because he's been following this in detail here. And so what's in the this is the $40 billion plan they have. And it's the Blue Ribbon Plan envisions 8 large desalination plants off the coast of California and Mexico, powered potentially by small nuclear generators of the kind championed by the White House. That's Donald Trump's White House. Electricity could also come from solar or wind farms, which Trump has repeatedly tried to kill such projects and has succeeded. Building the plants would cost about $40 billion, the project proponent claimed. The plants would potentially be built in the Sea of Cortez and federal enclaves on California's Pacific coast. I didn't say specifically where those enclaves are, which would limit environmental roadblocks. Desalination work by removing salt and ocean water, getting salty water. Something goes on to the effects that they have on toxic on aquatic life. Fresh water will be pumped at least 100 miles inland to reach California's Imperial Valley, a vast desert that today is irrigated with Colorado River water and grows crops from alfalfa to for lettuce and onions and so on. And the new water, the so-called new water, would allow California to give up some of its Colorado River allocations. So this would be a paper water transfer. Burr believes the plan could be privately or publicly funded. I would say most likely it'd be, if it ever got going, a public-private partnership, which is more attractive for investors. He said the pendulum against overregulation environmentalism is swinging back in favor of ordinary Americans and business owners who otherwise would have stopped the construction of Lake Powell or Lake Mead. And then it goes into other proposals and criticisms from the environmental community, which I'll say because I think we'll go into that here. And so let me go back here to my home screen here. I'm going to stop sharing here. And Conner, you got to turn your camera back on. There you are. Okay, so what do you give us your response if you're not too shocked? If you're not too traumatized. And,
first, your sound was going in and out. So when you go through, edit your sound.
Okay.
If you can. But here, hopefully you can hear me clearly.
I do.
Okay. So you and I have been at this a long time. I've been doing water work since the 80s, when I decided, amongst the other water and environmental issues, that I would just pick one. Actually, it was my father said, pick the one you care the most about, and it was water. So we have seen various proposals to kind of create this sense that there's an abundance of water and it's not a finite resource, and we can continue to waste more than we use. And it's a complex issue. So desalination, the idea that you can take ocean water and convert it, is kind of an engineering holy grail. However, it's not really a solution when you come down to a sense of priorities, which is what we really lack in the water world. So, in my background, I have worked for municipal water utilities. I've worked with an engineering firm coming up with kind of what we used to call appropriate technology solutions on saving water. I've worked with state, county, and local governments on all of these issues. And now I'm working with nonprofit coalitions. One of them is the Desal Response Group, because in the late 80s, there was a proposal when I was living in the little town of Ojai to build a desal plant, which was actually built and sat idle for 24 years in Santa Barbara. It sat idle because we go through these cycles, and we're seeing more and more with climate exchange of extremes of dry. I don't like to use the drought because the drought never ends, really. That's the way we should think about it. But then also we get these floods, and we've certainly felt that in the last winter. So with those cycles, we really have to maximize our local water usage so we can capture rain when it falls, even on a very local level, like we do here in the city of Santa Monica, which huge cisterns and other systems to reuse water. But the desalination is kind of a sexy technology thing where people think we can just supply a huge amount of energy without thinking of the impacts on the intake or the discharge, which are both massive to fisheries and other marine life. And we can just somehow pump that water in to our system. Of course, it's all going to have to be pumped uphill, which is even more energy. And we know from experience of working on this issue for so long with regulators, um, even the World Health Organization, that there's a problem with boron, which is a naturally occurring element in some desert areas as well. But when you have too much of it, which you would have in ocean water, it will kill plants. It also has an impact on male reproductive health. Essentially, it shrinks male testicles. So, my real question is, why are we even still talking about this? Because we go through these waves where we kind of tend to ignore the fact that demand has gone down across urban California and the whole West. We have some excellent studies from the Pacific Institute in Oakland. There's a new West Virginia study as well showing increases of population no longer mean a greater demand for water as we have become more efficient, and we can become far more efficient. Orange County, where you live, John, is a great example of taking recycled water, which is wastewater, and cleaning it up multiple times to the point where it's cleaner than what comes out of the tap, and then reintroducing it back through the groundwater and then treating it again when it comes up.
And actually, I live in San Diego County now, and we have the other, not example from the opposite spectrum, and that's the Carlsbad desal plant. But go ahead.
Right. But San Diego County, especially inland, is looking at doing these pure water programs, and they've already broken ground. Inland, the city has been talking about it for a long time, but that's really a real future. So when we went through the process, and I think we met at a desal meeting around in the early 2000s in Huntington Beach over Poseidon, we had the element of a private company trying to make profit and looking for a location. They had come from Florida, where they had failed. Ironically, was my original boss when I left California. I was in New Hampshire. Jerry Maxwell went to get his PhD in Florida, and he ended up being head of the Tampa Bay Water Authority, which attempted with Poseidon to do a plant. It was a series of disasters. Somehow, that 25 million gallons a day plant was sold out here first to San Diego County with a 30-year take-or-pay deal, which is the only way it would make sense for the private industry, which now we have found makes no sense for a public regional water wholesaler who's looking to offload that water. First, they were looking to do it to Arizona. Then they were looking to do it to an exchange. It looks like it might happen to what's called Eastern, another regional wholesaler. And so that they'll move that water, which is going up to $4,000 an acre foot, and try to replace it. with water from the Colorado River, which is, quite frankly, we've known this for a long time. We continue to see it with terrible levels of snowpack. Um, Even when we had a lot in California, they weren't getting it in the Rockies. So we have diminishing supplies. But the paradox here is, and the strange dichotomy is, despite ourselves not making a priority, we are becoming more efficient. It's not always water agencies who actually sell water as a commodity that are interested in those levels of efficiency, but actually businesses, industry, institutions, and people themselves. So my real question is, I would say it's not the technology stupid when we apply it to desalination. We thought when, as you mentioned, the Poseidon as a company said we're done in California and the day of big desal is done. Um, the governor had pushed it heavily and then used his power to push one in Monterey area in the town of Marina with huge opposition, which hasn't been resolved or built yet either.
How
The
big
other
would
one,
that one be? How big would
uh,
that one be? How big would that
uh,
proposed plant be?
I'm trying. It's small. It's less than 10,000.
Okay, so it's a small one.
But
Okay.
it's not like the small ones like you're potentially talking about in the latest pipeline fantasy of these, modular nuclear desal plants being built up and down the coast, which doesn't resolve the issues of the intake and the discharge, doesn't resolve the issues of pumping the water, and really doesn't resolve the primary thing we should talk about, which is need. Do we really need these plants? Do we need these, what we call zombie water supply boondoggles that have been around for many years? The other two that I've been challenging for as just as long, 30 to 40 years, are Cadiz, which is a desert water mining project. Um, and the third one is this whole concept of building a delta tunnel now underneath. It was a peripheral canal voted down by the people. These projects invest huge amounts of money, huge amounts of time, both for the agencies and for us as environmentalists and ratepayers and taxpayers who challenge them, and they never seem to get built. And the ones that do, like Poseidon and Carlsbad, we find we don't really need. So it's a discussion, but I think it's just a distraction on what should be the real priorities of water, because we do have the impacts of climate change. We do have, and we've seen, essentially the death of fisheries off of the coast because of these intakes, including the nuclear power intake, which in Diablo Canyon they're about to reopen and given another extension when even the utility that owned it, PG&E, didn't want to do that. So we really have to be, in these times especially, there will not be federal money to build these things. There will not be private money to build them. But we want to kind of save ourselves from ourselves and somehow maintain crops like alfalfa in the desert and new development in Arizona, where I hear the developers are fighting a good rule that would have said you had to show where water was going to come from for the next 100 years. So it puts politicians in a tough place because they want to look like they have an answer. California passed in the midst of the then driest period of 2014, 2015, a groundwater bill. Water should be put underground. We should clean up our aquifers, and we should use that as a priority, not new dams, not reservoirs with heat and wind. But how do we transition and how do we make this change? I would say, I hope in my lifetime, where we stop having these pipeline fantasies of having ever more water from sources that never really deliver and are way too costly, um, and do what we've actually started doing and been doing successfully in a lot of places, including Southern California, which is maximizing our local water.
So talking about uh, pipeline fantasies and so on, and also the funding for some of these projects. Um, So let me see if I can. I don't know if I need to bring this up, but I can read it off here. There's a proposal, another proposal. A report just came out recently from so-called California Policy Center. Are you able to hear me as I'm
Yeah,
speaking
I
up?
can hear you clearly now.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And this report is authored by Edward Ring, who we both know, and director of the so-called Water and Energy Policy, and some others like that, and saying that they seek to the report they came out with. It's called "Creating Opportunities to Bring Seawater Desalination to Coastal Federal Lands of California," and it suggests that federal actions to facilitate desalination facilities on federal coastal lands, streamlining approvals and promoting partnerships with local agencies and so on, can secure long-term water supplies. And it goes through that that basic thing. It says seawater desalination is successfully used worldwide and so on, could boost water reliability. So that's these are from the abundance crowd, the eternal abundance and more abundance crowd there. So now they're optimistic because of Donald Trump, who, although he's eviscerated funding so far in all the worst ways of and just every single federal agency there is, especially when it comes to dealing with climate change and so on, eviscerating any mention of it in any federal publications or bills or policies or anything. So they've got a friend there. I think they think they have a friend there, and not sure yet about the he definitely supports these kind of projects. I think you could probably bet on that. But how much funding would actually uh, come from the federal government? That probably is still up in the air. But they're all very much in support of that. So, what do you think? And then there's some other proposals we can go on too that have come out of the San Diego County Water Authority. But what do you think of that? I mean, what's the likelihood? I mean, if anybody knows of this crazy president we have who's got us in a, a hugely expensive war that's tanking the world economy, and so he might actually be all for funding these the craziest of the crazy desal projects. Don't you think?
I wouldn't guess what our Mad King knows or doesn't know. What I'm more concerned about is the undoing of both drinking water standards like PFAS. A lot of things a lot of us had worked for a long time on had
Yeah,
compromised the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, which also impacts water quality. All of these things are, politically um, at risk and being trying to take apart, including the National Energy Policy Act, which is the national review, CEQA, which is our California Environmental Quality Act. Those regulations are there for a reason and for a need. We have over 1 million people without access to safe, clean, and affordable drinking water and sanitation in the state. That number's gone down with some focus on it. But if you take away federal subsidies and put them on projects where they shouldn't be applied, meanwhile, we're in a great financial hole. Um, the state no longer has a surplus. The federal government goes more deeply in debt. War has a huge impact on everything, on resources. Um, and redirects money away, and we don't know when and if and or how that will end, and the impacts will long be felt on the economy. So, where is there money to invest in these pipeline fantasies, as I like to call them? Um, there isn't. So, if you don't know how you're going to pay for a project up front, and you're not willing to evaluate the environmental impacts, or cost of these projects. Again, I don't know why we're talking about them. The irony is the projects we don't really talk about and celebrate are actually working and working well and maybe our only alternative as we move into the future. And affordability is a big issue. It's not just a buzzword, it's having real impacts on all levels of families. In all the chaotic and volatile times we live in right now, we should be making some rational choices. And those rational choices aren't going to come from the federal government, and I don't think they're going to come from the state government. So these things are going to have to be locally directed. And water is a vast empire of individual agencies with these larger wholesalers like the Metropolitan Water District, the Orange County Water District, the San Diego County Water Authority, and then underneath them, all these water resellers, both private and public. So there's really not a cohesion on these issues, even on the Colorado River with the 7 states, and we don't get enough input from those impacted in Mexico on what's left of the Colorado River Delta. We can't come to consensus on these issues. So, we can set up deadlines that get bypassed again and again on the Colorado River negotiations, but the issues are real. So we're going to have to come up with a new way of solving water problems. And I don't think it is, the sense that there's endless abundance, that we can build endless expensive housing, not affordable housing. And we can disregard rules that have been in place for years. So going out into the federal seas, which means you're going offshore and away from the coastal commission, doesn't resolve the issue. You didn't mention, but there's quote unquote new, but isn't really new technology that's being proposed for offshore desalination. There's one called Ocean Well with buoys offshore. There's another technology using tide power. That Ocean Well got a pilot, and the other one in Fort Bragg went through the Coastal Commission. So we're studying these things. But while we study these things, we're having record heat in March. I grew up in California and I've never experienced these extremes. The fires we had last January, unprecedented in terms of the heat and the wind and the dryness. So, manufacturing water for private entities and as a commodity is a concept that just totally has to change. I would suggest people read or reread one of my mentors, Dorothy Green, who's kind of the matriarch of a lot of environmental groups in Los Angeles and beyond. And Managing California's Avoiding Crisis, I believe it's 2007 UC Press. But a lot of what she was talking about then, has really come true. It's saying that we really have to refocus how we think about water, both short term and long term. Otherwise, we're having these same discussions 40 years later, and conditions aren't getting better. And you're also reaching a tipping point where people can't afford water. They can't afford water to garden. So they're going to start using their own gray water systems. We want them to do it properly, but they're going to capture the water that isn't the black water, toilet water in their house and reusing it. We're going to be forced, because the high cost of water, to rethink how we use it. And we're going to have to rethink how we do governance in water as well. We can certainly consolidate, but we have to know how to do that better. A good example are the community of Altadena, which is LA County. So they fall out of a municipality, but they had 3 water mutuals and a little bit of the city of Pasadena servicing them. Water hasn't been restored to those areas. Sanitation hasn't been restored. Those water mutuals actually came out of an ag era many years ago and don't really have the capacity, one, to deal with a disaster, but even two, to supply clean, affordable drinking water, what we call the human right to water.
So, all this tinkering, with technology, uh, while we're running out of time. We're running out of time, as you're pointing out there. But I mean, we have, as a species, human beings, I think this was pointed out very starkly just a couple of years ago in an address that Noam Chomsky gave. Well, I'll set aside the controversy over his sitting down with Jeffrey Epstein. Sad though that may be, what he said is worth repeating. And basically, the issue is whether human beings, which have a fantastic ability to think things through, to plan, and so on, but also have a kind of an instinct, I guess, to self-destruct and to destroy things. And so we've come to a point where we have to very shortly make a decision as to which way we're going to go. And we're talking about not just water issues. We look at Iraq, in Iran, what's going on in the Persian Gulf. Trump threatening to take out energy supplies and desal and so on in Iran, which really only relies on for desal on 10% of its water, whereas the other Gulf states up to 90% and so on. But it's already in a state of, I think you would call it water bankruptcy, which means that there's no, it's just diminishing return. There's no replacing, refilling their supplies, and they're down to catastrophic water supply levels, and there's internal fighting and so on. And they threatened to, and have to a certain extent retaliated by hitting the desal plants elsewhere. And so we have a catastrophe there, and the doomsday clock is closer. By the atomic the group of atomic scientists is he also learned is closer. It's closer now. It's within seconds of the time when we could expect possibly a nuclear holocaust, wipe life out. And here we are tinkering around with our usual stupid destructive things we do. And so how do you get an agency like the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which is the mother of all water agencies, or most water agencies in Southern California, including the San Diego County Water Authority, which is a highly transactional agency, a lot of politicking going on, power plays, and so on. And it kind of reminds me of, the so-called banality of evil. These people who are just sitting there while everything's crumbling around them, and are actually, in some respects, egging on the Trump administration's approach to self-destruction. And so how do we get organized to do something, to actually do something? And we know what the potential for catastrophe is. Any sensible person knows that. And so what do you think we can do about that? How can we shake the MWD, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and other agencies to their senses?
Well, John, after about 40 years of working on it, I can't say I have an answer. I say it's continuously challenged, and some of it may have to break down on its own weight, I'm afraid, because it can't continue the way it is. As you well know, I supported a general manager of the Metropolitan Water District who was a change agent, and we thought they seriously wanted to make change. His background was on recycled water with the city of Los Angeles and environmental programs. And he came in and tried to change a very different culture, which, like you said, has a lot of politics and other issues going on. And he was summarily dismissed despite our efforts. So if it doesn't come from the top, it's going to have to come from all the many people that are appointed without oversight and without term limits who sit in those positions of power. Now, I was elected to a water district in Ventura County from the little town of Ojai. Still has a remnant of kind of gentleman farming and its own groundwater. We had looked at getting water from the State Water Project, which is that big aqueduct coming down to the five, and weren't able to do it, which was a good thing because then we started to take care of our own groundwater and deal with issues locally. The state legislation that was passed, as I was starting to mention, in 2014, 2015, called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, to set up these new groundwater agencies as an example of what you shouldn't do because it doesn't get implemented until 2040 or 2041, despite the plans we've recently passed. I sit on one now for what's called the Mound Basin at the bottom of the Santa Clara River in the Oxnard Plain and near the city of Ventura. But those processes kind of deny the inevitable. It's like, we've got a terrible problem. Let's have a committee and study it forever. And the solutions we come up with or the trends we ignore don't seem to apply to it. So, you brought up a lot of issues that are happening. The disruption of the global trade with war, especially around oil, the criminal threats to blow up infrastructure, bridges, desalination plants, and others. But no one talks about, are there limits to any of these resources? Are there limits to growth in certain places where we don't have adequate local resources? We don't talk
Arabia, for example.
yeah, we don't talk about that until we create those limits ourselves. But the first thing that has the impact are not the people trying to make money off of it, developers and others who should be part of the solution and have been in the past sometimes, increasing efficiency. In Australia, they actually mine the sewer lines below the buildings that they build and treat and capture that water to do things like flush toilets. Our whole engineering version of solutions, which work quite well and were amazing, engineering feats to build a gravity-fed system that takes the whole Owens River and delivers it to the city of Los Angeles, or the Hoover Dam and those other dams, which provided electricity and water for many years. But we can't live on that baseline in the past. We have to realize things have already changed, and they've changed drastically. And the impacts on the tribes, the Mono Lake, which is a unique alkaline lake where brine shrimp birds fly from South America. All these impacts have happened because we've just looked at a single focus on engineering. How can we get this water for more development for Los Angeles? And the tribes who lost their land, who lost their water, who lost their culture, are fighting back to get what they deserve there as well. So we need a much broader way. The word holistic doesn't really cover the way we need to look at these issues. If
Well,
we're
the
going to survive,
they're not even officially part of the process, either in California or dealing with the Colorado River Basin. And
no, they've been left out of the process. I would recommend something that I've been doing for a lot of these things over 20 years, but one of them is Southern California Water Dialogue. I know you listen to them, John. They vary in terms of the outcome of how they work, but our attempt is to get different viewpoints once a month. We don't meet at the end in November, December, but we pull together. So the last one was actually on water affordability. We had three different perspectives. We had Max Gomberg, who gave a kind of a strong view from the environmental justice point, and we've talked about the Colorado River on a regular basis, including having a tribal representative who isn't part of the negotiations. and I would say the same for what DWP is doing. They've never complied with that 30% savings that we did through community groups, which was so successful till they kind of stopped the program, where that water was supposed to go back to the freshwater tributaries the creeks that flow into Mono Lake to create that ecosystem in balance. So, while the Salt Lake City has built out and assumed part of the Great Salt Lake, that lake is dying. We don't want to kill the environment for short-term promise of water that won't be there in the future. If we do it right, we can have both, but we also have to admit there are some limits in location and where and how we build, and people don't want to hear that. But I think if you ask people directly, if you would save water, which you've done, we've shown that even with population increases. If you want to save water, wouldn't you like a percentage of it to go back to the environment? People would say yes if they had that option. But instead, DWP's ignored the decree from the State Water Resources Board for 31 years, going on 32 years, and they won't negotiate with the tribes on these issues. And it's that kind of command and control view of resources that has to change. How
Well,
we
we're
do
destroying
that, I don't know.
we're destroying all our resources and access to the resources while while the people who are managing them are playing political games all the time. And it's like this memorandum of understanding that the San Diego County Water Authority reached with, which doesn't mean anything. It's not a contract. It's just kind of like a promise to try to take its desal water, its expensive desal water, as you said, should be approaching about $4,000 an acre foot now. At any rate, way more expensive than anything else. Which only is a small, literally drop in the bucket when you consider the whole Colorado basin and the states who suck water off of it. And so they're for a small, piddling amount of water that they now have this idea to. The MWD hasn't approved it yet, but they probably will, to take their expensive desal water that their constituents, that their ratepayers don't want to pay for, and is making them politically desperate. It's threatening the very existence of the San Diego County Water Authority, because one of the ways to cut back on expenses is to get rid of that agency and all the perks that it has, and so on. That's been seriously brought up, and so they're desperate to get this off their back. So they want to, certain states like Nevada and Arizona have expressed an interest in a paper water exchange, taking this desal water, and so basically the water authority would be selling its share of the Colorado River water, a share of that to these other entities. So, but that is nothing. It doesn't that doesn't going to solve. It's going to refill Lake Mead or Lake Powell or anything. It's not going to. It's a joke, and we're all wrapped up in this bullshit. And for this deal that they made with MWD, which has to do with transactional politics, which we'll have to go into that in another day, but that's all related to the scandal of really replacing, of sacking their progressive former general manager, Adele Hodge-Khalil. But anyway, so here we are, and it's crazy.
So, John, I agree with you on all that, but the question is, you can make water as simple or complex as you want, and I think we have to get back to the basics. So that there's a tendency to make these issues complex, and the idea that the paternal patriarch of water agencies will take care of it for you. I think that era is done. I think people are understanding water. When I talk about it, they're interested in a way they haven't been before, and they're getting involved personally in it. So I think that will change, but institutions and their cultures don't change easily. They resist, and as we've seen, they go backwards. But really what we should be thinking about in these difficult, chaotic, volatile, and dark times is what can we do locally? How can we work with others? And how can we actually have success? It takes a long time. I've been working on the treatment plant in the San Fernando Valley back from the 90s, in the day when an unfortunate editorial came out from a candidate who was on the city council and voted for the project called the Tillman plant and the East Valley recharge of taking that recycled water and letting it recharge like Orange County has done it back into their aquifer, cleaned up. And for many years, through many mayors, and now we've broken ground and we're moving forward on it. But I have to say, the other half of that is our objective in looking at this as environmentalists is to come up with solutions that benefit everybody, the environment and people. So the cost-effective solutions that are immediate and can help the environment are part of it. Some of them are longer-term projects like this. So the Metropolitan Water District has hearings coming up on their budget. So if you're interested in water, you have to look and see how money is going to be spent. And we want it to be spent properly with input and an understanding of what the impacts are. That's it. I mean, people spend a lot of time attacking environmentalists without really realizing what we're asking for and how much time we spend in looking at other solutions in these long-term boondoggles that just don't seem to happen. So, we're forced to get real about these things. The Colorado River isn't going to replenish itself. Um, and we've polluted our offshore and the ocean. I mean, a lot of places you're talking about drawing desal intake water right next to a sewage outfall, which was a discussion we were having. So we've actually been promoting and prioritizing cleaning up that sewage water so it doesn't get dumped into what we call receiving waters, creeks, rivers, and others, and is reused. So that Tillman plant, big stormwater projects, given that we're getting a lot of this water all at once, nothing in between, how do we capture that water locally? I know people personally that keep putting in bigger and more cisterns around their house so they're not dependent on buying water. People want to be independent from these big centralized systems. So we should make maximum use of reuse. I know a wonderful woman engineer has been working for years. A lot of her work ended up being overseas, but getting industry who finally gets it now to capture and reuse their water, not to dump out the pollution, but to clean it up on site. There's lots of solutions there, and I think that's what we should be focused on, and think of what we're going to do in these extreme conditions we're living in. We're supposed to have a super El Nino, which could mean hotter and drier. It could also mean more extreme storms. These cycles that we're used to have off of the jet stream um, are erratic now. So the baseline that we built this whole big plumbing system on of storage and snow melt isn't working anymore. Um, in a way, these are fascinating times, but they're also very challenging. And it's going to take a new generation of engineers who look and think about things differently. And I've seen that happen with young people I work with. I think it's a new generation of people from tribes and environmental groups, community groups, neighborhood groups who are involved in this. Another excellent group I work with is called Amigos de los Rios, that does local water education, keeping schools from flooding, putting the water back in the ground while creating playgrounds. Simple things like that, replicated everywhere, could make a huge difference. Getting the community groups that save water to work in their own communities and actually have an economic development through that with community-based organizations is a project that's shown to work and needs to be replicated. So in the end, it's going to come from the bottom up, not from the top down. And those are the changes that will work. And we should consider what works and what is just a fantasy. Um, and for profit, not for the public. And we should think about ultimately what we're working for here is what's called the public trust. It's a doctrine in the state. The Mono Lake decision was based on it. That's the way we should look at groundwater. It's the way we should look at surface waters. That's the way we should look at us all water is whose water is it anyway? Is it our water or is it a commodity to be bought and sold? And until we decide which way we're going to go on this, a hard path or a soft path, we will continue to be in this quandary.
So that's I'm glad you brought up all those things that we can do and that we should do, and how we can do them. I think one of the things we need is some political force behind that. And you said, as you said, it's going to come from the bottom up. It's not going to come from the top. We're not going to. We can't sit around and wait for. And, and I'm thinking, I get some inspiration uh, from movements like that were centered around just affordability in general. There's no reason why water couldn't and certainly should be incorporated into that. Yeah, water should be incorporated into our political scene as much as all these other issues, if not more, because it's what keeps us alive. And so I'm inspired a bit by a lot by movements like the one that got very grassroots movement that got uh, uh, Mayor Mondami elected in New York City. Although now that he's elected, how successful will he be? I think a lot of politicians like that, they get in there and then they start to try to make the changes through the old fashioned way of trying to wheel and deal with the establishment that they're stuck with there. I'm also even more inspired by what's happened in the city of Seattle in the last 10 years, where a grassroots effort there that organized and brought people literally out in the streets to the meetings through a not just wheeling and dealing, but through demands made by a strong public presence, were able to beat the billionaires to create billionaires, including Jeff Bezos, who stood against them, to bring about important reforms, real reforms about regarding housing affordability and taxing billionaires and so on. And it worked. So it can be done. But we have to get past the usual transactional politics that are just corrupted this country in so many ways. The money, and this is a product. These disasters are a product of our for-profit system, and that's where I think we have to get more into that. Profit is driving this. It's not concern for people. It's concern for certain people and their damn profits. And that's what screws us. So we have to fight that. And I will be having a guest on in a couple of weeks who will be talking about that. And I think we need to get water is, even though it's covered a lot more, as you know, than it was before. And a lot of it had to do with the Poseidon Project. We together, those of us at the grassroots level, finally got the mainstream media interested in that too, and that became an important issue. But water and water is an important issue when it comes to, there's a drought, there's this usual superficial and some good stories and all that, but it's not infused like you don't see Bernie Sanders going around the country making speeches about water. He's making speeches about other good things. But so, anyways, I think you understand what I'm saying here. So
Yeah, I would say it often used to feel like it was the same 100 people in the room talking to each other about water. Right. And you could, water agencies, you and I went to MODOC dinners. They actually gave us press pass. You wrote about it, but those were kind of a pay to play position where you could talk to the regulators and the wholesalers amongst yourselves. I think that there needs to be, in those terms, a revolution in terms of water not being us and them. It's got to be everyone.
Right.
It's got to be the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, which is formed with the 5 tribes that were so greatly impacted and left with terrible air quality because of the stealing of their water and their land. It's got to be with these community groups that are doing a great job. I lost a good friend of mine recently Melanie Winter, who did work along the LA River from a neighborhood basis and looking at the headwaters and a different approach on how we do water that involves more and more people. I didn't realize how many people she had impacted until we had two memorials in honor of her in a former railroad switching yard that became a river park um, called Rio de Los Angeles, and um, there have been many positive things that have happened. There have been many great people. Another one, one of the four groups that I uh, help and co-chair and run was called the Environmental Water Caucus, made of statewide groups. The guy who ran it, David Nesmith, passed last year. So he was a giant, uh, a river runner, like many people in Northern California who saw the impacts on rivers and the negative impacts of damming rivers and got involved in a policy level for the rest of his life. So, it takes that kind of dedication. So I'm looking forward I love it when I go into a room of water people and I don't know most of them. Like the other day, an environmental justice thing in South LA, a group called Scope with the Better World Group. Um, I love it when there isn't just gray hair or lack of hair like mine. There's dark hair and, and people with, another generation, because these are legacy issues and we have to get involved in these things forever. You have to weigh in and stay in because yeah, democracy is a wonderful concept in water, but we're not seeing it, and we need to see more of it. And I think we will, because I think it's the only solution that actually works, and the rest of it is wasting money and time, essentially while Rome burns or while we all bake and we have these extremes. Fires have a huge impact on water supply in the headwaters in Northern California. But we really have to adapt to what we have here in Southern California. And we have the potential to capture so much more water and reuse it while still returning water to the environment and having some remnant of what was once a beautiful uh, area with a cornucopia of species that lived together in some sort of harmony. We have to change that, and it can't be an endless water war that we are fighting in. Wars never end, and wars don't solve anything; they only make it worse. So I want to see an end to the water wars. I want to see solutions. I want to see a new generation who are actually educated in these issues. When I went to college and university, just the beginning of environmental programs, and there's still not enough water education programs for people to understand the issue. People need to know where their water comes from and where it goes, and they need to know what the solutions are. And people deserve to. So don't and I always say don't underestimate people's ability to go backwards, which we've found a lot on these issues, especially recently.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I don't think we should underestimate people's ability to work together and move forward.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll